Your retirement account is currently making one of the riskiest bets on Wall Street, and you never agreed to it. Nobody called you. Nobody asked for your signature. It just happened, quietly, in the background, while you were busy living your life and assuming your 401k was doing something safe and boring like it's supposed to. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If you own any kind of S&P 500 index fund, and statistically you probably do, you are currently more exposed to 7 companies than most professional fund managers would ever willingly allow themselves to be. And you didn't choose that. The market chose it for you. Let's talk about why. Because to understand how your retirement became a leveraged bet on a handful of tech companies, you have to understand something most people never think about, which is how index funds actually decide what to buy. When you put money into an S&P 500 fund, you assume it's diversified across 500 different companies, evenly spread out, safe by virtue of variety. That's not how it works anymore. The S&P 500 is weighted by market capitalization, meaning the bigger a company gets, the more of your money automatically flows into it. No vote required, no opt-out available. And right now, 7 companies, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, Meta, Tesla, and Nvidia, make up somewhere around 36% of the entire index, which means more than a third of your supposedly diversified retirement account is quietly riding on the fortunes of 7 stocks. This isn't a conspiracy theory, it's just arithmetic. And arithmetic doesn't care whether you understood the mechanism before your money went in. Here's the part that should actually worry you. We've seen this exact movie before, and it didn't end well the last time either. Back in the early 1970s, Wall Street had its own version of the Magnificent Seven. They called it the Nifty 50, a group of supposedly untouchable blue-chip stocks, Coca-Cola, Xerox, McDonald's, Polaroid. Companies so dominant that buying them was considered a one-decision investment, meaning the only decision you ever needed to make was buy, because selling was basically unthinkable. Investors at the time genuinely believed these companies were bulletproof, immune to recessions, immune to competition, immune to gravity itself. At their peak, those 50 stocks made up nearly 45% of the entire U.S. stock market, trading at an average of 42 times earnings, numbers that only made sense if you assumed these companies would grow into the sky forever. Then 1973 hit. Oil prices quadrupled. Inflation surged past 11%. The market cratered 50%, and the so-called untouchable stocks got crushed even harder than the market average. Polaroid alone lost more than 90% of its value. It took 8 full years for the market to recover to where it had been before the crash. 8 years of watching your retirement account sit underwater while your bills didn't stop coming. And here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud right now. The Magnificent Seven today are trading at similarly stretched valuations, Nvidia at around 50 times earnings, Tesla at an almost absurd 247 times earnings. And just like in 1972, everyone is telling themselves the same bedtime story, that this time it's different, that these companies are simply too good, too dominant, too essential to ever meaningfully fall. That phrase, "this time it's different," has been called the 4 most expensive words in the English language, and it's expensive precisely because it's usually wrong. But even if you're comfortable with that concentration risk, even if you've made peace with the idea that your retirement is basically a bet on 7 companies staying dominant forever, there's a second mechanism you probably don't know about, and it's arguably even more dangerous, because it doesn't just affect what you own, it affects what gets forced into your portfolio without your input at all. This year, Elon Musk's SpaceX is preparing to go public at a target valuation of $1.75 trillion, making it worth more than Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Disney, Nike, and Starbucks combined, despite the company losing roughly $5 billion last year. If you're wondering who exactly is supposed to buy a company that unprofitable at a valuation that extreme, you're asking the right question, and the honest answer is uncomfortable. It's you. And here's where it gets personal for you specifically. Nasdaq quietly changed its listing rules earlier this year, cutting the waiting period for new companies to join major indexes from 3 months down to just 15 trading days, and lowering the minimum public float requirement that used to disqualify companies like SpaceX from being included at all. On top of that, Buried in the technical language of the new rules is something even stranger, a multiplier that treats a small public float as if it were 3 times larger than it actually is for index weighting purposes, meaning a company that only makes 5% of its shares available to the public gets weighted in the index as though 15% were trading freely. What all of this means, stripped of the jargon, is simple and a little terrifying. Once SpaceX goes public and gets added to major indexes, every single fund that tracks those indexes, including the one sitting inside your retirement account right now, will be legally required to automatically buy SpaceX stock. Not because a fund manager researched it and believed in it. Not because you decided you wanted exposure to a company that's currently burning billions of dollars a year. Simply because the mechanical rules of passive investing say so. A portfolio manager summed it up in one brutally honest sentence that should be printed on every 401k statement in America: your retirement account is the exit liquidity. Meaning the earliest investors and insiders in these companies get to sell their shares at peak valuation directly into the automatic, forced buying created by index funds. And the person absorbing that risk on the other side of the trade is you, whether you understood the mechanism or not. This is the part traditional financial media conveniently skips over because it's not a headline that trends on social media. Nobody wants to click on an article titled Nasdaq quietly rewrote its index inclusion rules to manufacture demand for an unprofitable company. It doesn't have the same energy as SpaceX goes public in biggest IPO ever. But the boring, unclickable version is the one that actually determines what happens to your money. So let's zoom out and connect these two mechanisms, because together they paint a picture that should genuinely concern anyone with a retirement account. On one side, you have extreme concentration, more than a third of your supposed diversification quietly riding on 7 companies, trading at valuations that echo one of the worst market collapses in modern history. On the other side, you have a passive investing system that is structurally required to keep buying newly added mega-cap companies, regardless of price, regardless of profitability, regardless of whether the fundamentals make any sense at all. These two forces don't cancel each other out, they compound. Because as more expensive, unprofitable companies get added to the index through mechanisms like this one, the concentration problem gets worse, not better, and your retirement account has no ability to opt out of any of it. You can't call your 401k provider and say, "Actually, please don't buy me any SpaceX stock when it gets added to the index," or "Please rebalance me away from Nvidia because I think it's overvalued." The system doesn't work that way. It buys what the index tells it to buy, automatically, mechanically, without asking your permission, which is precisely why almost nobody understands this is even happening to them until it's too late to do much about it. And look, none of this means passive investing is a scam or that you should panic and pull everything into cash tomorrow. Passive investing genuinely revolutionized how ordinary people build wealth, low fees, broad exposure, no need to pick individual stocks, all real and valuable benefits. But the pitch you were sold? Low fees? Diversification? Set it and forget it? Conveniently left out the part where the exact same mechanism that makes investing effortless for you also makes you a mandatory buyer for whatever gets engineered into the index next, at whatever price the market decides to charge, with zero input from you at any point in the process. Warren Buffett once said, "What we learn from history is that people don't learn from history," and right now, we are watching 2 separate historical patterns collide inside the one account most people trust the most, their retirement savings. The Nifty 50 taught us what happens when concentration gets mistaken for safety. History rhymed once already, and 8 years is a long time to wait for your retirement account to simply get back to even. The question worth sitting with isn't whether these 7 companies are good businesses. They probably are. The question is whether you actually understood what you signed up for when you assumed your retirement account was diversified, and whether you're comfortable knowing that the next unprofitable mega valuation IPO could get mechanically forced into your portfolio the exact same way without a single phone call asking whether you agreed. Because that's the real story here, not whether SpaceX succeeds or fails, not whether the Magnificent Seven keep climbing or eventually correct, but the fact that the decision was never yours to make in the first place, and most people find that out only after it's already too late to do anything about it.